Hi, I'm Michaela, and this is my husband Dave, and we're here to talk to you today about intimacy, which is kind of a hard topic to talk about. I don't think there were a lot of people who stood up saying that they wanted to have this conversation today, but Dave and I stood up and were willing to talk about kind of some of our challenges that we've had since being diagnosed with OCD. So, Dave, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I graduated from Kansas State University with a doctorate in adult education in 2016, and been an adult educator for about 20 years. And before that, I was in the Army, and I really have enjoyed that time, but it's also a structured life, so it also had an impact on my OCD.
And I have over 20 years experience in elementary school. I've been a teacher, I've been a principal. I also went ahead and worked on my PhD in 2016, graduated at the same time Dave did from University of Kansas in curriculum and instruction. The interesting thing I think about Dave's PhD, he actually wrote an autoethnography for his dissertation, and it really delved into his life, particularly with OCD, some of the challenges of it. So we really feel strongly about helping couples who have OCD or any kind of mental health challenge in their marriage. So that's what we're here to talk about today.
So I think one thing, if we were asked to talk about the impact of OCD on our sex life and our intimacy as a committed couple, especially before we were diagnosed, what do you think would stand out?
I think it's important to talk about intimacy and to define intimacy, because intimacy isn't just sex. I think that's what people automatically think about. But when I think about intimacy and define it, I think about my closeness to you. And I think about the times in our life when we have not felt as close to one another and our walls start to crumble a little bit. I think about our first years of marriage before we knew that OCD was in our marriage, another part of our marriage. And some of the things that, let's be honest, I thought were just weird that you would do. And I remember thinking that just brings me farther away from you. But when we were able to figure out that there was OCD in our marriage, we were able to work really hard with that communication, which in my mind brought us closer, which then helped our intimacy just globally, just with everything. What do you think?
I agree. I think when we were so young, and so we were naive to certain parts, not only of sex and intimacy, but just how a committed relationship works. And I agree with you, that trust and communication really are the foundations. And part of the problem I know I had with OCD was that it was like a termite with the foundation of trust and communication, because my cycle of obsessions and compulsions mostly were obsessive, and mostly about social taboos.
Well, let's get into that a little bit,
Yeah.
Because before we even knew about the social taboos, I remember you would see a beautiful woman walking on the street, and I would have to hear everything about it, or when we went to the grocery store, or even Walmart, and I remember that affected me personally, because I thought, oh, well, I'm not pretty, I'm not that person that he wants to be with.
That's right.
And I remember how much it hurt me. So I remember that being a big obstacle to just our whole intimacy, because if you're not feeling beautiful, if you're not feeling wanton and wanted, then that intimacy piece is hard. Let's just say
No,
it.
you're right. And the weird thing is, from my point of view, as the OCD cycle, having been able to look at it back with my dissertation and therapy, I was able to discern that what was happening on my side was, rather than just a normal attraction, for example, for another person that all of us have, my ability to express that and the emotional tagging that I put to that
Well,
was obsessive.
I remember you saying, well, if I don't tell you about this, then we're going to be divorced. And I thought, well,
That's right.
We're going to get a divorce. And that was just,
That's that irrational jump.
yes.
And it led to the compulsion of, okay, well, I have to tell you, because if I don't tell you, that means it's the end of communication. That means it's the end of our marriage, our relationship, and it just snowballed. And so my approach was to tell you, even though it meant short term that, well, there goes our intimacy or desire for it.
Well, and you felt better for telling me, but it made me feel awful.
Yeah, but it was
And
short term too. Comes the next trigger, and there I am again obsessing.
And I remember telling you, I see handsome men. And I just, okay, he's walking by, and I just move on. But I think the sticking point for you was that you had to tell me every detail about it.
That's
so
right.
That definitely got in the way.
Oh, absolutely.
of our intimacy. I remember year 7 in our marriage, and honestly, I was at that point where I thought, is this the person I want to be with for the rest of my life? And I remember our therapist, because remember at first it was, well, let's go to couples therapy, and nothing really seemed to fit. Mm-hmm. So finally our therapist said, well, have you ever thought about OCD? You're a pure O, you have that obsession. And I remember that as being the turning point in our marriage. And we're not going to sit here and say that mental health and having OCD in a marriage is something that is easy to work with. We have worked on this for 20 years now, since we found out about our diagnosis.
That's right.
But we've worked really hard at it. So being able to name the OCD, I think, helped us then to work at being able to say, you're doing it, stop it.
Right.
Because when you start telling me about a woman, I don't want to hear this. And I know that was hard to hear, because I'm sure you were.
Well, it was also hard because from the OCD perspective, what you were asking me to do was stop a compulsion mid-compulsion. And that is super difficult. And it's almost like stopping a sneeze. And it got to the point where I had to trust you, because I knew the consequences if I didn't.
And that wasn't easy. That wasn't an overnight thing. But it did help our intimacy. It helped with that communication, just with that overall trust of one another, which I think is important in any relationship.
Right.
Even if you just are in a very committed relationship, period, you have to have that communication piece.
Absolutely. And I think also over the years we've learned things that we've done to help improve, that we've kind of tools we've picked up along the way. One for me that and before I get into that, I've also learned the difference between the erotic versus the agape love, where you don't have to go through the physical act just to feel intimate with your partner. And so one example of that we learned was just squeezing hands in public 3 times, and both knowing that means I love you. It's a reaffirmation of love, of commitment, in a very private way, in a public setting if needed. But it's also just in daily life. It doesn't have to be a set aside time or anything like that. So.
Well, and I'm glad that you brought up the agape love, because I think that you have to grow into that. And of course, that intimacy is so important with that agape love, because I truly think now we can look at each other and we just know. We know when we need to be physical and show our love that way. But we also know when we can just hold hands or just cuddle on the couch and be close that way too. Right. And I also know we start to crumble a little bit when we don't have that physical connection. I know that we're very physical, that's very important to us.
Right. And I think that's the thing. It's coming up with, some people call it the love language. Whatever it is, it's finding what works for you and having a communication about that, a conversation about, hey, this works for me when you do this. And your partner deserves to know that, because then he or she can accommodate that, and help that love grow.
So I think intimacy, I think, is about communication. It's about trust. It's about being there for one another. through any trial, through thick or thin. It's not easy being a caregiver, I mean, to somebody who has OCD, but it takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of love, compassion, and I think we've worked very hard to have that between each other. And I wouldn't trade you for anybody in the world.
Thank you. And I think also on another side of the coin is that we've talked about this before, how OCD has not gone from our relationship. We still struggle with it, but we also strive to thrive with it too. And in that sense, it's actually improved our intimacy in terms of being deliberate, being focused on our relationship, and knowing the consequences if we don't.
So continue to work together, continue to communicate. We all know that it's not easy. It's a daily challenge, but with your partner, with the person that you've committed to, I oftentimes will call you my penguin because penguins are together for life.
Sure.
It's hard, but keep working at it. And
You're not alone.
Yep, you are not alone at all. And I love you.
I love you.
So for more information, you can absolutely follow us. We have Twitter, we have Facebook. You can visit us at ocdandmarriage.com.
And also, if you want to see some of the resources we compiled, we wrote OCD and Marriage, which is available on Amazon. And I also write a monthly blog on Psychology Today. Thanks, and remember, you as a couple, you're together in it, together, and also you're not alone.
I love you.